Let's turn now to another developing story, though. Ontario's Education Minister, Stephen Lecce, insists that he won't negotiate with education workers unless they withdraw their notice to strike. The union representing those workers, CUPE, says despite legislation forcing its members to stay on the job, they do plan to strike Friday.
Remove the strike threat. Why is there a strike on Friday if we're trying to have, through a private mediator, good faith negotiations to lead to a voluntary settlement that avoids all of this? But that option isn't on the table today. It is regrettable we are here because I don't think we should be here.
You're not going to consider what's actually in the counteroffer unless they withdraw the threat of a strike.
The union needs to take the strike off the table.
The government is planning to pass legislation banning the strike and will use the notwithstanding clause to circumvent a charter challenge, effectively to circumvent the right to strike. The opposition isn't happy. The NDP's interim leader, Peter Tabuns, going so far as to say Premier Doug Ford or to ask Premier Doug Ford to, quote, stop lying. That led to Tabuns and other members of his caucus getting kicked out of the legislature because they would not withdraw their comments after the speaker asked them to. You can look there on your screen and see the footage from our CBC reporter of two MPPs being escorted out as that happened. The debate over the use of the notwithstanding clause also spilled over, however, to the federal scene, prompting this pointed exchange on Parliament Hill.
I call on the Leader of the Opposition to stand up for workers' rights, to defend people's rights and freedoms, and condemn the preemptive use of the notwithstanding clause to suspend workers' rights.
No one has done more to attack workers' rights than the Prime Minister, who eats up their paychecks with 40-year highs in inflation.
So let's try and understand why this might go from the halls of the legislature to the halls of Parliament Hill. And to help us do that, let's bring in Michele Cadario. She's a former campaign director and deputy chief of staff to Paul Martin, now CEO of Vanguard Strategy, and Kory Teneycke, Rubicon Strategy CEO in 2022, Ontario PC campaign manager. Hi, Kory. Hi, Michele. Good to see you both. Michele, I'll start with you because this really over the past 48 hours has simmered here on Parliament Hill. The Prime Minister didn't hesitate at all to jump in and condemn the government's use, provincial government's use, and then ask his opponent, the leader of the Conservative Party, federal Conservative Party, to do the same. Why do you think that is? Why is this an issue the federal Liberals are jumping on?
Well, I think that it's, the very fact of taking away rights so precipitously and not actually trying to really go through the negotiations with the labor union is something that's really of concern. And I think that all Canadians should be concerned that putting the notwithstanding clause into a bill so soon without letting the whole process carry out, it's a big issue. And it's happening more and more across the country. And so that does become a federal issue. And, the new leader of the opposition says he wants to be prime minister, but he is dancing like no tomorrow around this issue. He does not want to talk about it. He does not want to answer it directly. He does not want to, stick his finger into this at all, whether it's because he doesn't want to make Doug Ford mad, or it's because he's just not sure where to come down on the issue. But, I think that the federal government is right and to go after Mr. Poilievre to figure out what it's going to do. Now, the other issue is I'm not sure what the federal government can do, and that's where it does get tricky. And so it's really kind of just calling upon some moral leadership, I think. And Mr. Poilievre seems to be lacking at that so far.
Let me ask you, Kory, a little bit about the politics, or what you think the politics are from your perspective. What do you think the federal Liberals, have to gain by going on this?
Well, I think it's an opportunity for them to try to distract the public and change the topic off the economy because they're getting absolutely clobbered right now with inflation and interest rates and the prospect of a recession. And I think they're desperate to change the topic to almost anything. Although I got to say, I'm perplexed why they would want to change it to this because the rights that are really being defended by the province are the rights of the most vulnerable, and that's the children. There's 2 million kids in school in Ontario. Many of them have suffered greatly from school closures and online learning, being limited to online learning during the pandemic. And there was a lot of suffering as a result of that. But the rights of those kids and their parents and those families have to be considered as well. And so, that is a very popular sentiment, Vashi. It's about 70% of the public that in Ontario support having the schools remain open to prevent this strike action from occurring. And getting on the wrong side of 70% of the public and virtually every parent in the province of Ontario with kids in school is a perplexing political move on the part of the Liberal government. So I understand they want to change the topic and have a distraction, but man, oh man, this is not a smart one to jump in on.
Michele, what do you think of that framing, and how would you, I guess, counsel the Liberals to respond to it? The framing of that in invoking the notwithstanding clause, in attempting to pass, or probably passing this legislation, or introducing it, I should say, that the provincial PC government is saying we're acting, we're trying to protect the rights of kids to stay in school. And obviously their opposition is saying, well, you're subjugating the rights of others to do so. Like, how do you think that framing will be perceived, and the political strategy behind it?
Well, where I agree with Kory is that, yes, parents are going to want to keep their kids in school. Absolutely. But I think that there's a big difference between what mechanism is used. And countless governments have been able to do it over the decades to actually negotiate with labor unions and get a deal. And so, I appreciate that they're trying to tuck in the use of the notwithstanding clause behind that. And ignore that. And I think that that's where, certainly the Prime Minister is trying to make what this issue is about. It's not about kids not going to school. It's not interfering in the actual labor negotiations. It's about the very fact that how can a government so easily take away the rights of people? And there has to be some kind of a system here in this country where that is not taken lightly.
Sorry, Kory, let her finish, and I'll get you in if you don't mind.
Sure.
Thank you. Go ahead, Michele.
Well, I'm just saying that, Doug Ford has used the notwithstanding clause more than any other premier in Ontario's history. And he's only been premier for 4 years. So, sometimes you got to roll up your sleeves and really work hard to try and get results. And yeah, they should be working to keep schools open and keeping kids in classrooms, because that is fundamentally very important. But the core moral issue, as I was talking about before, which I think is where the Prime Minister is going, is what kind of country do you want? Do you want something where you can just take away people's rights with using your swift majority, and just being so cavalier about it? And I think that's something that they are right to press on.
I want to ask you each a question that sort of requires removing partisanship and at least attempt to do so, because I think both the provincial Conservatives and the federal Liberals have a bit of a vulnerability on this point. And the first question would be to you, Kory, and that is kind of jumping off what Michele said. Is there a vulnerability at all of looking like you're taking I think some headline I read, taking a hammer to a fist fight kind of thing, like that you're willing to use this option? And I get the framing around keeping kids in school. I totally understand it. I would guess what polling shows you. I'm just asking if there is a bit of a vulnerability, if you do end up using this many more times, that you get that impression.
I don't think so.
Why not?
I don't think so, because we have used it before, and it's a completely valid use of the law and the Constitution. The reality is there would not be a Constitution or a Charter of Rights without the inclusion of the notwithstanding clause. There wouldn't be one. It is as legitimate a part of the Constitution as any other part, and it's using it as a government is completely legitimate from a legal and constitutional perspective and from a moral perspective. The fact is that the Prime Minister chooses not to say a word when the province of Quebec uses this clause repeatedly. In fact, as a standard practice, it is included in legislation passed in Quebec. Whenever there is a potential constitutional issue with a piece of provincial legislation, the province of Quebec, they put it in there, and they've done it dozens and dozens and dozens of times. And what you hear from the Liberal Party and the Prime Minister, who is from the province of Quebec, is nothing. It's nothing. They say not a word. So, I think it is hypocritical in the extreme for Michele and for the Liberal Party to cry foul about another province using it when the Prime Minister's own province uses it routinely And there's not a mention made of that use.
Well,
it's legitimate. There won't be a price to be paid politically for it because it's being used for a morally noble reason of protecting children, because that's what it's being used for.
Yeah, I understand it's legitimate.
So, there isn't going to be a price.
Yeah, my question was whether there's any political vulnerability to a repeated use of it. But on the flip side,
we've used it 3 times, and
so far
twice before the last election, and we won a massive majority government on re-election. So if people, there is a way for people to respond to that, but it's at the ballot box.
Okay, I want to get Michele in on this because my original thought, which actually Kory highlighted as well, was around if there's a vulnerability for the Liberals on the fact that they didn't not say anything. For example, when Premier Legault invoked it around the language law preemptively, they did comment on it. They did say they were disappointed about it and that they were looking at options around things going forward. But it wasn't to the level that this is today. Is that a potential vulnerability for the federal Liberals, that that the use of the notwithstanding clause is obviously so offensive to them in this context, but not in the Quebec context?
Yeah, I think it actually is. It may surprise Kory, but I agree with some of what he said. I don't think that the Conservatives in Ontario are going to pay much of a price for the use of it at all. That doesn't mean it's right. And that doesn't mean that it might not have really long-term consequences that could be really drastic to how the country governs itself. There was a lot of silence at the federal level, not just from the federal Liberals, but from the federal Conservatives and pretty much everybody else when it was used in Quebec. And
every party, actually, that's pretty accurate, yeah.
Right, and so, but that doesn't make it right. This tool that was supposedly put in to be the utmost exception in the most exceptional of circumstances is perhaps now becoming commonplace. And I just think that it wasn't designed, in my knowledge, to be just another public policy tool, and making it a common way to go about for any government, I think is problematic.
Okay, I see Kory shaking his head. I'm out of time. I know you're going to say it's legitimate, like you just did, but I got to go. Thank you very much, both of you. I do appreciate you making time for this discussion tonight. Michele, Cadario, and Kory Teneycke. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.